Hello and welcome to video 13 in my Rigging in Maya series. All we're going to do in this video is continue on from the previous one where we built the joints and controls for this joint based facial rig. If you want to see how we got to this stage, then please check out the previous video. So as mentioned, we now have all the joints in position and orientated correctly. We also have all the controls ready. All that's left to do is wire these up so the controls drive the joints. Now before we dive in, I just wanted to mention that you can now download all the source files for each part of this Rigging in Maya series from my CubeBrush page. You can find the link in the description below. While you're there, why don't you grab some of the other tutorials, models or rigs I have on offer. Most are free, but if you would like to help contribute to these videos, all donations are welcome. Also keep an eye out for this, popping up throughout the video. When it does, it means that as an added bonus, I've written and uploaded a script which will help speed up that particular area of the rigging process. Right, let's dive in. If you remember, for the lip controls we created two joints per control. A root joint and also a tip joint, which will be the one that drives the model. I thought the best way to demonstrate the system used to drive these joints was to work in a separate scene, so we can cover it in more detail and not be distracted. So here we have our two joints plus a control. Unlike the other controls for the face, we don't want to use translations to manipulate the tip joint. Instead, we want to focus more on the rotation of the root joint. We are doing this so we can achieve a better arc, which will move around the face, and ensure the tip joint's orientation is always correct and pointing towards the root. Let's move the outliner out of the way and open the node editor. Bring the control and root joint into the node editor and remove that shape node. We don't need it. Let's make things a little bigger and open these up. What we're looking for is for the controls translations to affect the root joint's rotations. The first thing we need to do is work out which axis affects which. So it looks like the x-axis on the control should affect the y rotation on the joint. And the y-axis on the control should affect the x-axis on the joint. Okay, let's undo all that. And let's connect these directly and see what happens. So translate x to rotate y, and translate y to rotate x. If I move the control, it looks like nothing is happening. But if we look in the channel box, we can see it is having an effect. It's just a very small one. We need to increase the value so the joints move more. Press Tab and create a multiply divide node. Let's rename it so it matches the control and the joint. So maybe add orient multi to the end too. Expand the inputs. Connect translate x on the control to input 1x and translate y to input 1y. We need to keep in mind the way these need to be connected. So connect output x to rotate y. Delete that now. And output y to rotate x. And we can delete that too. At the moment, the amount the inputs are being multiplied by is 1, so we will just get the same values output from this node. We need to increase these to get the movement we need. Let's set this to something like 550. There. If you notice, the joint moved, so we know it's working. Let's apply it to the Y channel now too. Now if we move the control, the joints follow. Even moving up and down works too, although it's in the wrong way. We can easily fix that though by inverting the value, so setting it to -550 instead. Now we can move the control and the root joint rotates. So just reset these. That looks better. So what this means for our rig is we can translate this control and the tip joint will move around the mouth area in a nice arc. This works fine as it is, and if all our heads were perfectly spherical, we could leave this here. As you can see, the arc is too wide, so we need to find a way for it to get shallower. What we want is a way for the joint to move away from the control as the control is moved. So as the control moves along its x-axis, the joint moves along its z-axis, because that's the one which points down the bone. We want to control the tip joint now, so bring it into the node editor. We know what connections we need, so let's just connect them directly and see what happens. So connect translate x to translate z on the tip joint. The joint moved, which is good. And if we move the control, we can see that it does get further away, which is what we need, but it's still too linear and it moves behind the root joint. To get the arc, we need to tell the joint to move away more when the control moves more. So in effect, the values need to keep increasing. Duplicate the multiply divide node we already have. Open the attributes and let's reset those back to 1. And let's change this to trans because we are working with translations. Take the control's translate x attribute and connect it to input 1x on the new multiply divide node. At the moment, this will just multiply by 1, so the arc will be linear, so we need the value it's being multiplied by to change to and not be fixed. So let's just take the translate x value again and pipe that into input 2x. Just move these back. And this down. Now connect output x to translate z on the tip joint. The joint has now shot back here. With that said, we do have an improvement in the movement. The joint isn't moving behind the root joint now, and the movement gets faster the further away the control is. So we're on the right track. We now need a way to stop the joint jumping backwards. As you can see, there is a value on the Z translation, which is getting overwritten by the multiply divide node. Ideally, we need to keep this distance, but add to it. So we essentially need an offset. Create a new plus minus average node. Let's just reset this. Connect the translate Z attribute from the tip joint to the input 1D 0 attribute on the plus minus average node. Just open these up so we can see what's happening. Okay, try that again. Translate Z to input 1D 0. With that connected, we can now see the attribute here and an input 1D 1 has appeared. Do the same again, but this time connect translate Z to input 1D1 attribute. We now have two attributes here, so this node will add one to the other. We don't need both to be connected. We only connected them to make them visible, and so we could quickly store the joint's Z translate value. Go to the channel box and right click on input 1D0 and go to break connection. So that's the current length of the joint, and it's stored here and will always be added to whatever we pipe into the input 1D0 channel. Let's rename this node before we move on. So underscore offset underscore PMA. I'll move some of these around too. We need to get the output from the multiply divide node as we did before, but this time connect it to the input 1D0 attribute on the plus minus average node. Now connect output 1D to the tip joint's translate Z attribute. So that's better, but we have the same problem as earlier, where it's moving but it's not enough. It's also moving in the wrong direction. This value should be getting smaller. Let's just organise this a little better. Delete that node. Again, like before, we need another multiply divide node so we can increase the value. So duplicate one of the existing ones. Just open these. And we will rename it, changing the end to invert underscore reverse. Connect output 1D to input 1x. Let's change the input to x value to -1 so it will invert the value as well as multiply it. Now connect output x to translate z. So the joint's moved again, but now it's behind the root joint. Find the plus minus average node. Here it is. Let's try changing sum to subtract. There we go, that's fixed it. And now as I move the control, the tip joint gradually gets further away, so makes the arc shallower. This is good, but what if we wanted more control over the arc? What if we needed it to be shallower? Let's remove some of these nodes from the node editor. We don't need to see them anymore. And hide these. So we have the X translation going into both inputs on this multiply divide node. So these are the main values we are working with. Why don't we add another multiply divide node here so we can adjust the amount the translation is being multiplied by? This should give us more flexibility. I'll just duplicate this one. Open these. Connect translate X to input 1X. Move these over. So let's rename this to gradient. And connect output X to input 2X. Again, with it set to 1, we get the same result. If I increase this to, let's say, 10, you can see the joint moving away already. Now if I move the control, we get a much more acute angle in the arc. The beauty of this setup is that you could connect this attribute to 1 on the control, so the animator can animate the gradient or change it easily. You can also do the same with the input 1D1 attribute, which controls the distance of the joint. Adding this as an extra attribute will give the animator more flexibility and allow them to also move the lips in and out. So that's the setup for the mouth controls, and this could be used on many other aspects of the rig, maybe eyelid controls for example. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning before we added all these controls. So what I've done to help speed things up is create a script to automate everything you just saw. And this will be available to download at coffee.com/antCGi. To use it, all we do is select the control first and then the tip joint. Run the script and that's done for us. The past 10 minutes of work compressed into a few seconds. It also adds the attributes I mentioned previously, so you have more control over how the joints move. The gradient attribute will change the arc. So you can have it shallow or wide. Offset controls the overall distance of the joint, so like I said previously, you could move the lips out or in. And movement will adjust how far the joints move relative to the control. It's small things like this that help to improve workflow. So we have 10 lip joints to rig, which could take about 10 minutes each. So that's over an hour and a half's work. This script compresses that into about 10 seconds. So why don't you head over and download it now. Okay, now you've seen the process behind building this system. Let's go in and use the script to apply it to our face rig. So here we are back in our scene. We have all the controls we created in the previous video. And if I make them visible, we can see the joints too. So as you can see, we have exactly the same setup you saw previously. We have a root joint, a tip joint, and a control at the end. Now I could work through each of these in turn, following the steps I demonstrated before, or I could just use the script. So I select the control, and then the tip joint, and run the script. There we go, all set up. We can manipulate the lip now using this, and we can also edit how it works using these attributes. Let's go through now and add this to the rest of the lip joints. That's done. Do the corner joints now. Now the other side. Okay, those are done. I'll just disable joint selection so I can select all the lip controls. And we'll just enable it again. Oh, I have the jaw selected too, so I'll just deselect that. I can move all the controls now and the lip joints follow. And they also move around the face too, rather than just along one axis, making animation easier for the animator. Obviously, some of these need adjusting as the arc is maybe a bit too shallow in areas, but we have these attributes which will allow us to do just that. Plus, these attributes could be animated too. I'll reset the lips now. Now you could leave the lips like this and happily pass them on to the animator, but I want to go a step further. We added this global control previously, with the idea being this will move all the lip controls for us. Again, simplifying things for the animator. The problem we have is the lower lip controls are parented to the jaw, as they should be, as we need them to follow the jaw control. Whereas the upper lip controls are parented to the head control, so everything moves with the head. We want all the lip controls to follow the global control instead. So the logical thing to do would be to parent the lip controls to the mouth control, right? So we will move these here, and also move the ones under the jaw control to the mouth control too. So they are all now under this control, so we'll move with it. But as you can see, nothing happens. They work when used individually, but not when moved as a group. If we move this and look in the channel box, you can see we have clear translation values on the control. If I move the mouth control and select the lip control again, you'll see we don't have any values now. The way we have the lip rig set up means that the joint's movement and rotations is driven by the control's translate values. So in its current state, we can't use the mouth control. What we need to do is add something between the control and the joints, which will always have translate values, no matter what control we use. So let's create a locator. And let's parent constraint it to the upper lip joint. Actually, we need an offset group, so let's group it first. Now parent constrain the group to the upper lip joint, just to get it into the right position and orientation. Delete that constraint node, and let's make it smaller. The locator translate values are at 0, which is important. The values are being held by the offset group instead. Let's rename the locator now. Adding underscore lock to the end. And update the offset group too. We now need to parent it to the head control. That's the wrong way around. I'll just find the head control and move this into it. We need to make sure it's moving with the head before we wire it up. So open up the node editor. What we essentially need to do is unpick some of the connections now, because we want the locator to be the main driver, not the control. So let's add the locator. And the control. We can now display the graph for the control, which will bring in all the relevant nodes. Now this part may get a little fiddly, so what I would suggest is, if this is the approach you want, add the locator in from the start. Although there may be cases where you have similar problems with another area of your rig, and following the next steps could be a solution. So we need to backtrack a little and find out what the translations from the control are connected to. We can see there's a connection here to the gradient multinode, so I'll open this up. and we need to bring the locator back in. We just want to replace this connection. So take translate x from the locator and connect it to input 1x instead. Maya doesn't help matters by moving things around. Okay, let's look for another connection. Right, there's one here. We don't need to see that node, so let's remove it from the editor. And we don't need these, or this one. Okay, we have a connection here on the trans multinode, so let's replace that. So take translate x from the locator again and connect it to the trans multinode's input 1x. We have another connection here going from the main translate attribute. So it's effectively taking all x, y and z at the same time. Let's connect translate on the locator to the input 1 attribute on the orient multinode. We don't need to see that anymore. Okay, I think that's them all. Let's test it. So it moves with the locator, but I think we've missed one. Ah, that's it. I didn't actually connect to the locator before, so I'll do that now. So let's try that again. That's better. The locator now controls the joint. We now need to make the control move the locator, because we don't want the animator to ever see the locator. It needs to look like it's just the control that's in charge. I'm just going to use a point constraint because I only want the translation values. And make sure maintain offset is disabled. So now I can move the control, which in turn moves the locator, which then controls the joints. As you can see now, I can move the mouth control too, and the lip controls follow. This now works because even though the main control has 0 values, the locator has them instead regardless of what's moving it. So this will move the joints no matter what. Now, I realise that was probably a bit more complicated than it needed to be, but I think it's important to show things like that where you have a rig but you need to expand upon it. The good news is that I also updated the same script I mentioned earlier, so it will now automatically add in a locator for you. Again, just head to ko-fi.com/antCGi to download it. So that's what I'm going to do now. Reload the scene and add the lip controls again one by one, but using the updated script. So here we go again. I'm just going to go through, select the control and then the joint and run the script. So that's one done, and you can see we have a locator now. I'll just go through and add this to the rest of the lip joints. Do that one. And that one. There we go, done. I'll just show the joints again. We can use the mouth control now to adjust the lips globally. We also have the flexibility to adjust them individually too. We now have the issue where the lower lip controls no longer follow the jaw, but we can quickly fix this. Create an empty group. I'll just bring back the joints. We need the jaw joint. Parent constrain the group to the jaw joint and then delete the constraint node. The group now matches the position and orientation of the joint. Parent this to the mouth control. Rename the group to lower lip controls offset. And parent all the lower lip offset groups to the new group. Even though we've moved the controls, everything still works with the mouth control. All we need to do now is make the new group follow the jaw control, so use an orient constraint this time to do that. Now the lower lips follow the jaw again. They also follow the mouth control. Even if the mouth is open, they still follow the mouth control. So we are just giving the animator an extra degree of flexibility, essentially making their lives a bit easier, which is the whole point of a good rig. That's the lips rigged, and as mentioned before, you could use the same setup for the eyelids if you wanted the ability to pose them, although this would be better suited to a cartoon character with larger eyes. The beauty of this setup is the lips now follow everything. They even work if the whole head moves. So that's the mouth done. Let's move on to the rest of the rig, and you will be pleased to know that things get a lot easier from here on. With the rest of the face joints, all we're going to do is use a parent constraint to make them follow the controls. So once you've added one, you can then just select the control and then the joint and press G to repeat the constraint. So those are done. Told you it was simpler. We could use a more complicated system for each of these areas, but sometimes the simplest solution is the best. There's no point overcomplicating things. The animator can now move all these joints around to pose and animate the face. So we have these joints in here, and at the moment they can be translated and rotated. But why don't we give the animator a bit more freedom? Open the connection editor. Select the cheek control and click Reload Left, and then select the cheek joint and click Reload Right. Select Scale on either side to connect them. That simple step has now allowed the cheek to also scale as well as move. Now you can't see it here, but if you look in the channel box you can see the values have increased. Let's do the same with the opposite cheek. We can even add this into the lips and nose too. In fact, I would add it on all the joints. It's always worth checking that everything moves well with the head control. And also test the rest of the body too. Sometimes you will end up with a double transform if the hierarchy isn't right. So that's the head rigged, and there are still some adjustments we need to do. But we are now at a stage where we need to see how this affects the actual model, so let's do that next. We already have a skin cluster applied to our model, so all we need to do is add the new face joints to it. Once added, we can then edit how they influence it by painting the weights. Whenever you add joints to a model which is already bound to a skeleton, it's important that the joint hierarchy is in the original bind pose, so the pose it was in when it was first attached to the model. Adding joints to a posed model, even if it's only slightly moved, can result in an offset or possible other issues further down the line when you're coming to paint weights. The problem is the skeleton is now restricted by all the controls and systems we've added, so we need to disable them first. Go to Modify, Evaluate Nodes, Ignore All. This will temporarily disable all these systems in the scene. With the model selected, go to the Rigging menu set, and then under the Skin menu, select Go to Bind Pose. This will ensure that the skeleton is in the correct pose for us. You may not see much, if any, movement, but it's good to just make sure. We can now go through and select all our face joints. We don't need the eyes or eyelids as we added those previously. We also don't want the root joints either. These are just part of the rig and don't need to be skinned. I better select the nose too. And then add the model to the selection. Next, go to Skin, Edit Influences, Add Influence and open the options. I'll just reset this. You need to have lock weights enabled and the default weight set to 0. If you add the joints without these being set, Maya will add default weighting values to them, which will affect the other weights, meaning you will have to redo a lot of your earlier work. Locking the weights will add these joints with a value of 0, meaning your original weights are safe. That's the new joints added, so next go to Skin, Paint Skin Weights and open the window. Just move this over. Select that again. If I scroll down, we can see the new joints. You will also notice the padlock symbol is now indicating these are locked. As you can see, if I select them, they have no influence over the model, unlike the jaw, where we can see the weights have been preserved. Let's go through and unlock these now so we can work on them. I think that's them all. Before we start painting the weights, I'm going to store this pose. I'll just hide the joints and the model and the locators too. We need to select all the face controls. And in the channel box, I'm going to select all the attributes. Right click and select Key Selected. You could just press S2 to set a keyframe. In the timeline, we can see a red line to indicate the selected controls have a key on them now. Move over to frame 1 and enable Auto Keyframe. This will automatically add a keyframe for me as I move the controls. We can bring everything back now. I'm going to reduce the length of the time slider to 20. we only want to see the first two frames, so it's easier to select them. Looks like there's a rogue key on the eyelid, so I'll delete that. So we can see how the weights are affecting the model, we need to move some of the controls. Actually, I'll hide the locators again, as we don't need to see them. And turn off X-ray joints. So it looks like nothing's happening. The joint's not moving, but remember, earlier on we disabled the nodes. Go to Modify, Evaluate Nodes, and Evaluate All to get things working again. There we go. I'll disable joint selection too. We want to see them but not select them. I can now go back to frame 0 to get back to the default pose, which is essential when mirroring skin weights. I'll leave these for now and move the corner controls. I'll do both sides at the same time. Move those up. And these down. It looks strange having these wavy lips, but you need extreme poses when painting weights. I'll open the jaw slightly too. So there we have a basic pose for the lips. Open the Paint Skin Weights tool again and right click on the upper lip joint and go to Select Influence. I'll just reduce the brush size and disable X-ray joints again. I'm going to use Replace and reduce the opacity to begin with, so we can paint the effect gradually. Because I have already covered painting skin weights in a previous video, I won't be going into too much detail in this one, but feel free to refer back to that one if you're not sure how to proceed. I'll pick a softer brush too and start painting. Because we moved the joint, we can now see the vertices moving into position. If we hadn't posed this, you would see them turn white, but have no idea how the model would be deforming. Now I'll select the lower lip joint and start adding those weights. We don't want to affect the whole lip, we just want a gradual gradient going to the next joint. Let's do the corner joints next. With the corner, I want this to affect a larger area because we will have more movement here when he smiles and frowns. I'm just blocking these in for now, so don't worry about being exact or precise. That should do for now. Onto the middle joints now, and remember, we didn't move these controls, so don't worry if the vertices don't move. We do still need some influence here though. And again on the lower joint. That's the left side blocked out, so now we need to go in and smooth them out. A quick way to do this is to just select the head joint, as this affects all the lips too. Well, all the upper lips anyway. Switch to smooth and turn up the opacity. I'm just clicking gently around this area, not painting, because I don't want to soften too much. Let's switch to the jaw joint now, and we can soften the lower lips too. Again, just adjusting it gently. We can soften this area and the corner of the mouth too. You want a nice distribution of vertices and for it not to look angular. I know that that's going to be difficult with a low poly model. When you're happy, go back to frame 0 and go to Skin, Mirror Skin Weights. Just use the default settings and click Apply. If we now go to frame 1 again, we can see the weights on his right now match his left. And there, we've now got more control over the lips, so we can start to form mouth shapes. Although this area looks like it needs softening. I'm going to disable X-ray joints in the actual Paint Skin Weights window, just down here, so it doesn't activate each time I open it. Just smooth this out a little more. And switch to the upper lip joint and smooth this area out more. Go back to frame 0. Oops, may a bug. Let's just see how he looks with his mouth open. This doesn't look smooth enough. Let's see if we can fix that. Maybe try the jaw joint first. Yeah, that looks better. Switch to the head and soften that side too. Okay, let's reset the jaw and mirror the weights again. Yeah, looks good. Just test the lips. Yeah, there's an angle here we need to soften. We can come back to that though. With this tutorial, I don't want to drone on about painting weights for hours, so this is just a quick overview. But I would hope that you would spend a bit more time and care with your weights. Okay, let's move up to the cheek. Just move this out. We'll use a softer brush. Select the cheek influence and start painting. I'll make my brush bigger. We want more of an influence over the middle here, so it's fully weighted. Something like that. We can then use smooth to soften it back down and round it off. Now we can puff out his cheeks and suck them in. We can also use scale to adjust the shape too. And also rotate it if needed. So we're giving the animator full flexibility. I'll just mirror those weights across. We can select and move both cheeks out at the same time. And scale them. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and paint the rest of the weights around the face. They are just as easy as the cheeks and the lips. Just make sure you pose them first so you can visualise the influence the joint is having on the model. So here we have the model with all the weights painted and mirrored across. And to be honest, I just use NG skin tools to do it. We can pose the lips individually. And move them all at once. We can also scale them too to make them thinner or fuller depending on how stretched or squashed the lips need to be. We have the cheeks as before. The areas on the upper cheeks too for when we need to squint or sneer at someone. We can even raise and adjust the nostrils too, and animate the whole nose. Just like with the lips, you can move the eyebrows as a whole. And quickly rotate it. Or go in and edit the individual controls for a more dynamic pose. It's always worth making sure the face controls follow the head too, so they don't get left behind or have a double transform applied. This looks good. When you're at the stage with any facial rig, it's a good idea to try out a few poses to see how the joints look and how the weighting is holding up. I've added a few quick ones here. So we have a happy face to test the lips. An angry expression. Then shocked or surprised. And a silly face to see how the lips form around the tongue. I'll turn off the controls so we can see the model on its own. As you can see, even though this is a basic face rig, you can still achieve a good degree of emotion from it. You will notice that I've also added some tongue controls too. This is just a series of joints, but the ones towards the tip get closer together because you need that extra bit of flexibility. As for the controls, I'll just open the outliner. These are just basic FK controls as we've used before. They're just all parented to the jaw control. So we can rotate it. And also scale it too. I'll just move that back. and bring back the model and hide the joints. So there we have it, a full joint-based facial rig with lots of controls to play around with. So that's the joint-based rig complete. What I want to do is finish this rig with a video covering adding extra controls for locking it down, making it ready for the animator, cleaning up the scene, and also making the whole rig scalable. Before I do that though, I want to take a couple of steps back and revisit the facial rig, but this time we will look at building it using blend shapes instead of joints. So, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please let me know in the comments below. Also let me know if you have any questions and tell me what future videos you would like to see. Remember to download the files from my CubeBrush page so you can follow along. And why not say thanks and also earn exclusive rewards with a small donation via my Ko-fi page. As always, remember to like this tutorial and subscribe to my channel. And remember to hit that bell icon so you're kept up to date with notifications on future videos and posts. This is antCGi signing off, and I will see you on the next one.